And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And I hope everybody is doing great today. Today, we're going to take a look at DC's latest venture, Blue Beetle. I think it's one of the last movies to come out before James Gunn launches into his Gods and Monsters chapter of his DC reboot. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and be sure to check out all of the other episodes of this podcast on this channel, as well as the Bushwhackers. Season 2 is currently underway, and there will be more content coming up in the months to come. Your Moviness, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I actually rewatched this yesterday for our review, and somehow I felt like it lost a little bit more luster, which wasn't saying a whole lot, but
Well, it's a
I
DC
was
movie,
definitely shocked
so
by it. Yes, that's true. It feels like we're watching the slow death of. I mean, I think even superheroes as a whole, but definitely for this franchise, kind of try to hint at a sequel, and judging from the box office, that will definitely not be happening.
And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, James Gunn was brought in to help retool the whole DC universe. I mean, are you feeling optimistic at all that he can pull it off, or is this him biting off more than he can chew?
I mean, at this stage, he can't make it any worse, is the way I'm gonna put it. So do I have some faith? I mean, I guess a little bit. I mean, I do like, I think James Gunn has definitely produced some good superhero movies, so I think he's capable of doing it. I just don't know. Like, you really have to almost, like, the brand is suffering hard, and I think that's not just unique to these movies. It's like, I think superheroes as a whole, like, that fatigue is starting to set in. So I don't think it's necessarily his directing ability that's going to be the most important thing. It's just that as audience, right, as us as viewers going forward, do we even care enough about whatever this new iteration of superheroes that comes out? Are we going to care enough that we want to go see it? And that's the I don't believe in more than anything else.
And we did mention this a few weeks ago when we did our review of we did our reaction to Aquaman, the latest Aquaman trailer. So that hasn't changed, since that last review.
Not at all.
But for those of you who aren't aware, Blue Beetle, this Blue Beetle is actually the second iteration of the character. The first Blue Beetle was a character named Ted Kord, and he was basically like Batman, except instead of bats, he was obsessed with blue beetles, and he actually built all this high tech weaponry, and he had a little airship and everything that you sort of see in the movie.
Wait, did you do research for this, Luca?
I'm a huge comic book nerd, so.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, good for you, man.
So yeah, I mean, in the comics, Ted Kord was the original Blue Beetle until he was killed by Maxwell Lord, who was portrayed in Wonder Woman 1984 by Pedro Pascal. And after that, a new incarnation of Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes, took over. But instead of taking over the mantle, quote unquote, as in he took over the tech and everything, this iteration basically had an alien scarab that was fused to his back, and he becomes a sort of symbiotic superhero. So let's go ahead and dive into the movie. South Park gave us Mexican Joker. Your Moviness has coined this as Mexican Spider-Man, basically.
Well, I wouldn't quite put it like that, but it definitely feels like it doesn't really do a whole, like, it just feels bland as the whole, right? Like, it doesn't really do anything special. To me, the only thing that really sticks out is the family, which I think has some highs and a ton of lows.
It's all about the family.
Yes, exactly. Yes, we can make all the jokes we want about family. Insert Fast and Furious jokes here. But yes, that's what it felt like it came down to was, I looked at this and I watched this, and like the whole time I kept just thinking to myself, like, wow, it's not creating anything new. And I think if I was to watch this like maybe 2 decades ago, right, like before all the superhero stuff was out there, I'd be like, okay, this was, interesting, right? This was fun. It's colorful. You got all this stuff going on. You got this big cast of people. I could get behind it. But, when we've seen this story and we've seen almost every element of the story told before, and in most cases in a better way. When you start watching this, it just starts to become more and more dull. So I really couldn't get behind most of it. And I think the part was, it wasn't that the movie was necessarily bad. It just didn't want to take any risks, right? That's all it was. It was just a very safe by the books. We're just going to borrow elements, storylines, plots, characters from all the other superhero movies, and we're just going to kind of throw it in here, and we're going to make a movie. And I think that's why this is like the lowest. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, they didn't just borrow; they borrowed very, very heavily, because some of the fight sequences, I had to do a double take, and I'm like, wait, that looks oddly familiar. But let's go ahead.
Am I watching this conclusion of Iron Man now?
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and dive in, because Victoria Cord, who's the sister of Ted Cord, who has gone missing, she takes over Cord Industries, and she has a very Obadiah Stane vibe to her, and to just add the cherry on top, the whole OMAC thing is very reminiscent of the Jericho missiles, and it's also very reminiscent of Justin Hammer from the second Iron Man movie. And Carapax is very, and feel free to butt in. Carapax very much reminds me of Anton Vanko.
Yes, no, I'd agree with that. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think the one thing that stuck out to me, right, was Susan Sarandon playing Victoria Cord. I think the fact that, to me, when I look at it, at least with Obadiah Stane, he was a little bit more, not as heavy-handed, right? Like, he was someone, like, you kind of got some maybe bad vibes for him, but he wasn't just, like, outright, like, in-your-face a villain.
It was very nuanced.
Yeah, exactly. There was no nuance to it, right? Like, for Victoria Cord, she was just in your face, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, immediately, she's the villain. Like, she's the bad guy. There's nothing redeeming about her. There's nothing really that interesting about her. She's just 100% a one-note villain that really has nothing going on. And like I said, I don't think the character, like, if you do a one-note villain, you can do that. It's not, it's not always super easy to do that, but it can be done. They did not do it with this character. It just did not get fleshed out at all. She was just there, was not a fan of it the whole time. So I feel bad for Susan Sarandon, who obviously has some great acting ability, and feels like I'm watching her, like, die on the screen during this movie.
And Carapax, he really didn't bring much to the movie either. He kind of reminded me of Bane from Batman and Robin, Yeah,
he had very, very little. Yes.
You could have taken him out of the movie, and it still would have ended up the same way that it did. So
yes, you could have put Nameless Soldier #4 in there, and I probably would have had the same enthusiasm for his character in the movie.
So what did you think about their mission to develop OMAC? That one-man Army Corps military project of theirs.
I just see, like, to me, it's just like I see Iron Man tech. That's all I see whenever I'm watching this stuff. I'm like, okay, cool. He's kind of like creating suits, and it just, to me, was not interesting at all. They also kind of like try to say, like, they need, like, the Blue Beetles. They call it the Blue Beetle Code, I believe. Mm-hmm. And that's somehow supposed to help with the OMAC stuff. Like, I don't know if maybe I just was really trying my best to pay attention to it and I wasn't getting it, but I was just like, I don't understand what exactly the Blue Beetle Code is supposed to do in order to make your suits work. I didn't really get that, but it just felt like, I'm just going to create, like, this army with all these, fancy tech, and I need to get this Blue Beetle thing that's going to, I guess, help that happen. But it's not like it took tech from it or anything. There's some type of code that they're looking for, and I don't know how that actually translated from why they needed it to how it was actually going to help with the suits.
So what did you think of Jaime Reyes as a character?
Yeah, so he felt like Tom Holland's Spider-Man, right? Like, he's just kind of like this happy, kind of go lucky person, has big aspirations, guess there's, some level, he's at college or whatever, and there's things that I enjoy about his character, but overall, it's sort of just, it doesn't really do anything for me. Like, I don't know too much about the actor. Didn't really, wasn't exactly something where I was like, oh yeah, like, we talked about, like, oh, can I ever imagine Robert Downey, anybody's Iron Man other than Robert Downey Jr. Or, can I ever imagine like somebody else that's gonna play Thor or something like that. But when I watch this, I'm like, okay, like I feel like about anybody could replace his character, and that's just because it felt flat. I really couldn't get into it. As I said, it just felt like you have kind of this kind of like goofy, quippy, superhero character, and that's all this character really was. And I just didn't really get behind it throughout the whole film.
So what about when he fused with the Scarab? Because I mean, because that very much reminded me of when he got of when what was it, Homecoming, when he gets that suit and he sort of like has this chat with the AI. I forget what the AI's name is. That's the vibe I got from from those scenes. Not to mention too, they decided to just fuse it with the Iron Spider suit as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the only thing I saw every time that came on the screen. I'm just like, okay, I could imagine like Tony Stark creating this tech for him, and that would be exactly how it looks. And like you point out, like we already saw that with Spider-Man and kind of the the tech suit that you have out there. And to me, that's all I got from this. Even with the interface, right, that's included with it, I'm like, okay, cool. So we got a low rent Jarvis that's also in the suit. Like it just absolutely reeked of like nothing special. You're just rehashing stuff that we've seen countless times. And it's just like, I don't know what they were thinking about with this iteration. Like, I don't know why you felt like that was the path you wanted to go with it. It would have been, I guess the other way you do it is you make it more like Venom. But I guess in that same argument, you start to make the comparison to Venom where, in this, it feels more of like a tech thing, whereas Venom feels more like a true, like, alien symbiote is kind of like, you're creating that symbiotic relationship. So I don't know, like it felt more towards the Iron Man side of things, but I think either it's just, to me, you're gonna see whatever option you go with. It's just a retread of something that we've seen decades ago.
So what did you think about the about Jenny Cord, the way they introduced her? Because she was, because at some point she's like the damsel in distress, but at the other point she's supposed to be like this badass modern woman who can take care of herself kind of thing. But to me, she was kind of flat. It was like, all right, she's there, she's a pretty face, and she's the potential and eventual love interest of Jaime Reyes.
Yes, yeah, and that's yeah, just thinking about her character and what she brought, it was just like, it's not believable, right? When I watch stuff like this, it's just like, okay, I'm really trying to, I know it's a superhero, like you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, but it just feels like something we've seen so many times before. Like, how old would you say your character was portrayed in this? How old do you think she is?
I would probably say her early to mid 20s ish.
Yeah, right. So early to mid 20s, right? And I get that, her father obviously, kind of inherited the company, so she's definitely got that. But it's just like one of those things where it's like, okay, we got, of course, someone in their mid 20s that's, kind of this like, super altruistic person where she's like, violence is bad, and you shouldn't be creating the Omex suits because we got out of the weapon stuff for a long time. And it's hard for me to really believe in that type of character and that type of mindset. And like you pointed out, like she's supposed to be kind of this like, really strong character that, has probably been like weathered over time, right? If you've kind of grown up in that, I imagine big business type of mentality, I'm sure that there's a lot of things that, you kind of grow up fast with because you have to be able to kind of react to the bigger world that you're living in. And it just never felt believable to me. There was like times where, like when she stole the Blue Beetle, right? I remember like when she's still in the Blue Beetle, she puts it in the box and she ends up giving it to Jaime. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, why? Why did you feel like this was a good idea? And I get that some of it comes from the idea that like, oh, there was like alarms and people are going to start to search for it, but it's like, no one's going to check her, right? Like they don't know that she's the one that stole it. So why would you give this super important item to somebody that you literally just met? Like it just didn't make any sense to me. Like if you're building this movie, right, and you're building that character for what she's doing, right, to me, you do like kind of like a handoff, like behind the scenes where you don't really know what's going on, and then that to me at least gives you something. But you can't build up this character as doing all this smart stuff and be able to, you know, kind of be this really worldly person, but then the whole time that you're doing it, she just makes really dumb decisions. And, you know, not just that, but then the whole relationship with Jaime was so incredibly forced. It was crazy to me. Like literally we see them like, you know, when they're at the Blue Beetle mansion, I'm just going to call it, I don't remember what it was, the Blue Beetle mansion, where it's like they, you know, they start to almost kiss and Rudy comes in and really interrupts them. But like the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, is this real? Like, do you guys even really know each other? Like, what am I actually watching? This is, you guys have absolutely zero chemistry, and there's nothing believable about this relationship. Like,
but she told him about his mother, so that should sort of be like the in, right?
yes, dead mothers. That's how you get in, right? It's just like talk about dead moms. That's what's going to be important for the conversation. So,
yeah, I mean, I mean, there were just so many characters that were just forced in. It was literally it's literally the situation of forcing, you know, a round peg into a square hole. That's what I got. That was my takeaway from that movie. What did you think about the family, about the whole situation, about them losing their house? You know, the dad loses his business and all that stuff. It was like,
yes.
It was just piling on. I'm like, yeah, we get it. You want to make this guy's life as shitty as possible.
Man, that was, talk about an awkward way to begin the movie where you just like force so much dialogue into the start. And you're absolutely right. Like, so like he's coming back from college, right? And like the whole conversation is, oh, and this happens, granted, right? This happens all within, I would say, 90 seconds, right? So the family's losing their house because the rent is super, super high now, right? The auto shop was closed that they worked at, which the auto shop I don't think ever gets referenced again, which I thought was also funny because it's like, you know, you brought that up, but then like I felt like you don't even bother having any closure to it. And then of course the father, oh yeah, he had a heart attack, and you get all that dumped on your plate within 90 seconds. Like it is just comically bad. Like you can't write dialogue like that. Like it feels so forced into the story, and it's all there just to kind of create this like kind of fabric of like, oh, this family's really struggling, but we never actually see them struggle, right? Like we're told that they struggle, but I never actually saw them struggle. So
yeah, they're not acting like they're struggling, basically.
Exactly, right? They go out, they're like, oh yeah, they kind of talk like, oh, well, you can't tip 25%. Like, you know, we're broke, but we're out at this fancy place drinking beers. So pick a lane, movie. I don't know what you're looking to do. So you have the father. The father, I'm just gonna call him Uncle Ben. That's all the father was.
Okay.
Father was Uncle Ben, right? That's all he was. He was this super nice person, and I think the best scenes were with him in it, right? I think the only times I really cared a whole lot about the movie was I did like his character, what he brought, right? But of course, he's kind of this really almost like super, super nice patriarchal character that's there that just has like no flaws to him, right? You know, just kind of a super nice guy. And like I said, he's there to get killed to move the story along. That's pretty much it, right? That's all he was. The mom, oh, by the way, this is great segue. The mom, did you recognize who played the mom in this movie? I would be very curious if you recognized
her. No, I don't actually.
Okay, so she was the girl that they found in Predator.
Are you serious?
Yes, that
Holy
is the girl that
shit.
they found in Predator. Yes. Right, totally blew me away. I did not know that, but when I watched it, I kind of like looked through some stuff afterwards, and I was like, "Holy crap, that's the girl that they picked up in Predator." You know, so like I said, coming back, what did Predator come out like in '87 or something? So you know, coming back 35 plus years later, you know, saw her in this. So, but yeah, the mom totally forgettable. You got Nana there.
Who only speaks Spanish, by the way.
Yes, who only speaks Spanish, and I think the reason they put her in there is so she could have some funny parts where she's carrying a big gun at the end because she doesn't really have anything during it. And then
Well,
you have
it's funny. Well, it's funny that you say that because she was basically toting the gun like Jesse Ventura did in Predator. So that was a huge nod
look
to
at
that.
Yeah, maybe a subtle connection there for people that know that. So that is a great point. So, and then you have like the sister Millie, and I just there was like maybe one or two scenes where I'm like, okay, I guess that was kind of funny, but then everything else was like, wow, this character's super obnoxious. Like when like you're seeing Susan Sarandon for the first, well, I guess when you're kind of meeting Susan Sarandon for the first time, you know, she's kind of like putting gum under the chair, and she's like, "Oh, this is job security." I'm like, okay, I guess that was kind of funny. Like I wasn't really expecting that. And then like later on, there's like a scene where she's like, "Oh, I need to go take a dump," and I'm like, "What? Is this comedy? Like, what is this? Like, are we supposed to be? Is it supposed to be because she's so like straightforward with everything? Is that funny? Like, I don't get it. Like, I just didn't really get what her character brought to the table. Like, I guess she was just supposed to be there and be like the super sarcastic person that made a whole bunch of quips, but it didn't land with me. I think the only you got Rudy, right? That's played by George Lopez. I think he was probably the only two times I laughed during the movie was watching George Lopez.
Right.
That was about the only two times that ever happened. So I think the first part was when he's going to the job interview. And George Lopez is like, you know, outside of his truck being like, "Hey, don't worry, you're gonna fit right in. You're dressed like an asshole and you're with a bunch of other assholes." I'm like, okay, that got me laughing. Like I was like, okay, that was a good one, George Lopez. You get one for that. And I think the other part where I kind of found myself chuckling was when they're in the, I don't know, the blue Beetle ship thing.
Yeah.
Right. When they're in the ship thing, and they're like blasting off and like everyone's screaming and George Lopez is just sitting there maniacally laughing to himself. Like that made me laugh. I was like, okay, at least George Lopez is having a good time.
Did you think it was kind of weird that he just knew how to fly that thing?
Oh, of course. It's always weird. Like you have him, like he does like weird things with tech which make no sense, right? So he has like that whatever was like on the back of the truck, right? That you kind of have like him using it and it like somehow gets to like the camera feed and is like giving it like some type of like old school like cartoon that plays over it. I'm like, how does this make any sense? Like, because we see all these other monitors and screens that aren't impacted, but I guess somehow he just knows how to like break into. I just couldn't follow it. So yeah, I mean, you do really have to suspend your disbelief that any of these characters know how to operate or do anything. And it's the same thing we was in the Blue Beetle match, and it's just like, oh, cool. Like, there's the big computer, like you see in the Batcave, where it's like, okay, we got this big computer. I'm just going to go in there, and I'm going to do research and find out all I can about this. Like, I'm pretty sure you don't know how that works, but you do you, George. You do you.
Yeah, I kind of thought it was interesting that he just goes in and knows how to access, you know, how old is it, like 20-plus-year-old computer and access the information like right then and there, even though he's never been in there. So I want to move on. So obviously we see that sequence where, you know, where Jaime, you know, bonds with the Scarab for the first time, and he's going through all these tests, and obviously that's a huge nod or a rip off, however you want to phrase it, to, you know, to the first Iron Man movie where he's working out the kinks with the suit. How did you? What did you think about that journey of him, you know, learning to accept his I guess quote unquote fate with being bonded to this thing? Because we learned from Dr. Sanchez that who's Guillermo, by the way, from What We Do in the Shadows. We learned that the Scarab is is sort of integrating itself into Jaime's systems to sort of, you know, become one with him. What did you think about that whole journey of him kind of learning how to, you know, work with the Scarab instead of, you know, fighting it and all that shit?
I don't know. I just thought about Venom and how like him interacting with Venom was kind of like similar. Like it felt totally glossed over during the movie that it just doesn't even really feel like it mattered. Like, we don't like when you have Venom, right? You kind of have this character that you get the sense that, he's acting crazy because that's kind of the way he is, right? The alien symbiote that he has, it acts like that because that's the way it normally acts. Where like when you do this like tech suit where it's alien, yes, but like you have it feels like it feels like AI. Like it's just hard to really get behind like what they're looking for, because you kind of have these moments where like the suit is okay with killing people, which is like, okay, well, that's kind of weird. And then at the end, it's like kind of like learns like, oh no, killing people's bad because Jaime doesn't like to kill people. And it's just like, oh, okay, cool. So I guess now it's like protecting him. But that to me has always been a part of like the superhero movies that I never really enjoy, is stuff like that. So like Jaime, right? So you see him like when the family, right? When the dad dies, Uncle Ben dies, right? So remember when Uncle Ben dies, right? So Jaime kind of flies in with the suit and like he's like, oh no, I don't want you to kill anybody. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, like, are you serious right now? Like these people are literally shooting guns at your family. I don't care. Like, I don't understand why superhero movies feel the need to make characters that have to be so painfully black and white. Like, I think if you're to pull a bunch of people and be like, hey, if a bunch of people were going out there to kill your family, would you feel justified in killing that person to save your family? I think 95% of people are going to be like, absolutely.
Yeah,
right?
let us know in the comment section below if you would sort of take justice in your own hands if your family was being threatened. We'd really like to know.
Yeah, let us know if you want to murder people. We'd like to know that in the comments. Would you like to kill people? So, but yeah, that was like my whole thing. Like I'm just sitting there watching it. I'm like, no, you just kill these people. Like there's no like, why do you feel the need to do that? And it just kind of reeked of Spider-Man, right? Not to, just to go into that, right? Where eventually catches up with, I don't know, Guy Fieri with like the frosted tips. I don't know, whoever the guy was that was retconned later to be, it wasn't actually him that killed him, but Sandman, but we won't even get into that nonsense. Yeah. But it just felt like, oh, like, cool. You're trying to make it like Spider-Man, where it's just like, oh, he has a chance to like do it. But like the whole time, it's like, it's kind of different, right? Because, with Spider-Man, we got the feeling for why he was kind of like that was because of stuff that he got from his uncle. But then in this, it's just like, it falls flat. Like if a bunch of people are shooting at your family, you kill those people. Like, I don't get it. Do you feel like, why do you feel like superhero films feel the need to force this like holier than thou persona on their characters?
Well, I think the idea is to sort of make him like a moral example of what of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. But I'm with you. I mean, if push comes to shove, you are going to have to hit back. I mean, yeah. For instance, when you go to war, right? If you're being attacked by the enemy, you're not going to just fire rubber bullets at them. You're going to fire live rounds into them.
Yeah, absolutely. And what always gets me confused as well, right? So he's super like, oh, I'm not going to kill anybody. That's, totally against, my code or whatever. So even though, my family's in grave danger and they could possibly die. And like I said, the father ends up getting killed in this process. I guess like he gets hit with like the butt of a gun and then he has a heart attack or something. So I guess, that's why they had to say he had a heart attack at the beginning, because you wouldn't know he had any issues with his heart if you didn't just tell us that. Because at no point do I recall any part in that whole film where the father looks sick at all, other than being told he had a heart attack at the beginning. Mm-hmm. But I always found it funny that like he has this idea, but then at the end of the film, right, during the final climax of the film, they're in that Blue Beetle thing and they're just like literally stomping on random.
I mean, they're killing those guys, by the way. Like, yeah, I think a few of them getting paled. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm just like, what? I'm so confused now. Like, movie, what are you trying to tell me? Like, so Jaime is really against it, even though there's situations where clearly you're justified in doing it. And then when they're in this like super armored suit that looks pretty much impenetrable, that guns are not gonna be able to do. Like the fan was just out there, no, we're just gonna kill people. It don't matter. You sit there, murder people. And I'm like, just no, like this doesn't work for me. Like, you know, give us a real reason for why he doesn't want to kill people other than just like, oh, I just don't want to do it. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And if you do that, that's fine. Don't put the family in a weird situation where anybody with half a brain to be like, you know what, he should just kill those people. Like, you don't do that as a film. Like, make it more ambiguous so I could be like, okay, I can at least understand why maybe he didn't want to do it, right? I think back to like Superman, right? You know, everyone kind of like makes, you know, kind of talks about Kevin Costner when he's like there and he's like, you know, oh, you know, don't show off your powers. And, you know, Superman could easily go in and save his dad, but he chooses not to, right? And everyone constantly talks about how ridiculous that is. But at least in that circumstance, I sort of get it. Whereas in this, I just don't get it at all. I don't understand what you're looking for with the character. And to me, it just makes his whole journey feel like less and less because it's like, why did you do that? I don't understand your motivation.
I mean,
and if this is the character we're following, we should understand him a lot better.
Well, I mean, if there's some exposition in the beginning where the dad, you know, gives him a moral lesson about, hey, things may be tough, but but you don't sink to their level. You rise above it. That would sort of make a little bit more sense. But there's nothing like that at all. You know, it's not like with Spider-Man where Uncle Ben tells me with great power comes great responsibility. There's nothing. There really isn't anything like that. That kind of like, lays the foundation for that moral code. You know.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
So, so the fight scenes are forgettable, obviously.
Yes.
What did you think about when Blue Beetle gets captured and he's strapped to that machine and they're siphoning off his energy?
Oh my god, that was just like, it has all those cliches, and it's just like, you got this like arbitrary number percent thing that always happens in films where it's like, okay, like we've sucked out 4% of the code or whatever the hell we're talking about. There's always like some system in place that clearly shows like what we're aiming for. And then he has the Black Panther experience, right? Where he goes to kind of this dream world with his father, just like in Black Panther, right? Where he goes to like this dream world, meets with the dad, and like all of the dialogue is so boring, cliche, something you've seen 10,000 times, right? And I'm just going to throw out some dialogue that popped up. The dad says, "This is always your destiny." And then the dad says, "This is not your time." And then Jaime says, "Oh, cool. Well, how do I know what to do?" And the dad's like, "Well, you'll know it from your heart." And like every single time, I was just like rolling the eyes so far back in my head, I probably could have scratched my brain. Like it just was constantly like the same thing. I'm like, is this like, who wrote this? Like, did you watch every cliche thing and be like, huh, let me make that my dialogue? I'm just going to sit there and be just overly cliche the whole time. Like everything in it, it just felt so phoned in. It's like you're not treading anything new. This is something we see all the time. And it's just like you can have a bingo card for all the generic dialogue in this, and you'd have a blackout on that card because they would hit every single boring trope you possibly can in that dialogue. And the other thing that always got me too, right? And you kind of talked about quote unquote Sanchez earlier. So Susan Sarandon, right? This main villain, right? A villain that pretty much like runs this huge company, right? Like this is, someone like, all jokes aside about how one-dimensional she is as a villain, right? She clearly is somehow capable of running a huge company, right? And the person that she trusts, she doesn't know his name. And I'm like, is this supposed to be something? Like, am I supposed to be like, oh wow, she's like so like evil that she doesn't even know like the subordinate's name, or is it because like she's racist and she doesn't want to learn it? Like, what am I being taught from this sequence? Because like all of a sudden the guy's like, no, I'm gonna save you. And it's just like, what is happening? Like, who the hell is this guy, this character that we've barely seen? He's like, oh, I'm gonna go save you, and then he's gonna have this big moment where he's like, no, my name is blah 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 Dela Cruz, and I'm like, is this been built up to anything? Like, who the hell is this guy, and why do I care anything about this little explosion it has at the end? He's like, yeah, go save your family, and I'm like, okay, cool. I guess that like bought him like maybe 5 seconds before the other guy, the other villain super suit comes at him. I'm just like, this is pointless. What am I watching? Like, this is not within anybody's character, and I'm just not having any fun. It's just, it was boring. The whole fight sequence was boring, and you know they have to bring up that, oh, you know, the bad guy, you know, family makes you weak. I'm like, geez, haven't heard that 1,000 times. He's like, no, my family makes me strong. And then, you know, it just makes me that much better than you. And then, you know, Jaime wins by the power of family.
Well, not to mention, well, don't forget, you know, the Scarab shows him Carapax's memories.
Yes.
So now he's like, oh, wait, family isn't a weakness. It's actually an asset. It's actually a strength. And now I know your pain. I'm like, okay, that's a very Oprah moment right there.
Yeah, it's just like literally we get like a minute of like back of like, you know, kind of the character's past. What was his name again? I'm sorry, you said it earlier. I already forgot the name.
Carapax. And can I just say that does not sound like a human name at all. That sounds like a bug name.
That's true. So you got Carapax, right? And he's like there. We get like this minute long of like a flashback or like his history, where it's like, okay, like, you know, he stepped on like a mine, and it was because like he was like a child soldier, it looks like, and it's just like, do we really need this? Like, does anyone actually care? Like, I've never once in the whole movie was like, God, I really wish I know what Carapax's backstory is. Never once did I care about that character or anything about what he was going to be doing. So why did the film need to be put that in? I don't know. I guess to like bring us some nice, warm, and comfy feeling at the end that, you know, this guy is getting closure. I'm like, I don't give a shit if this guy gets closure. Like, he's been the villain the whole time, and like you just flood this in at the end like it's somehow some type of deserved plot point. Like it just was flat. It was flat from beginning to end, and you know the whole ending, you know, has to be this all, you know, happy thing. They, you know, make a joke about him having a boner at the end. I'm like, oh, haha, that's funny, you know, whatever. And then, like I said, we get a nice closing and then a cliffhanger where it seems like the father might still be alive. But, you know, as I said at the beginning, you know, they try to throw that out there as something that's going to happen. But in reality, there's no way the box office is going to justify making a second of these films. And I don't think it even raised to the quality of there being a need for another one of these films.
So what's your overall score for this movie then?
I would give this, I would say, gosh, let me think here. So what I liked about this film, George Lopez had 2 funny lines in it, and I guess I liked Uncle Ben. And then everything else was annoying. I'm going to give it 2.1 out of 5 blue scarab beetles that make no sense. Alien blue scarabs beetle whatevers.
Yeah. I gotcha. I'm going to give it a 2.2 out of 5 scarab beetles, just because
not so highly of it.
I mean, I will say this. I will say this. I like the fact that George Lopez plays this crazy sort of, you know, this Barrio Doc Brown mad scientist kind of guy who just happens to know how everything works. If you suspend your disbelief, but he was pretty funny. I mean, he's also a comedian too, so that kind of helps. I did honestly, I kind of enjoyed I kind of enjoyed just watching Blue Beetle you know, on screen. I mean, I didn't like I mean, I didn't really care too much for the character himself, but I just like the way that he looked in the film because it's very comic book accurate. You know, being a comic book nerd myself, I really enjoyed it, and I kind of and I really like the hints of the previous Blue Beetle because it did have an Ant-Man vibe to it if you think about it.
Yes.
Because
Mhm.
because obviously even though Jaime isn't really taking over the the equipment and all the other stuff of the Blue Beetle, he's still carrying the mantle overall of the Blue Beetle hero. So I kind of like the fact that they were sort of doing the same thing with that. But I mean, but overall the story made no sense. The fight sequences were just repetitive. It's nothing new that we haven't seen. The dialogue was pretty much copy and paste. Someone must have taken a Marvel script, copy and pasted and taken out all references to Marvel heroes and inserted Blue Beetle, references, and there you go. That's a script. But it's one of those movies that I'm not going to rewatch anytime soon.
No,
So
absolutely not. Nope.
all right, well, that's going to do it for our review of Blue Beetle. Let us know down in the comments below what you think, if you thought it was a good movie or if you thought this was a movie that maybe should have just been tabled like the Batgirl movie. But for the Movie Pope podcast, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching. Bye.